This is a creepy panda production. Dollhouse Shadows. It was one of those rare rainy afternoons in mid-July when I stumbled upon the old Whitaker house. They said it was haunted, steeped in the kind of stories that make kids dare each other to touch the front gate and run away screaming. By eerie coincidence, I needed shelter from the storm, and the decaying mansion was the only option in sight. The door creaked open with a ghostly whisper, revealing a lobby covered in dust and cobwebs. There was a feeling of being watched, but as an aspiring writer, I felt these sensations were just tricks of the mind, material for my next book. As I ventured further, an item caught my eye, sitting conspicuously on a small table. It was a dollhouse, a replica of the Whitaker mansion. Each window mirrored those of the actual house, with tiny curtains drawn tight. What was more unsettling, I noticed figurines positioned inside the dollhouse, a family of dolls, each eerily identical to the residents who vanished under mysterious circumstances decades ago. A clap of thunder jolted me out of my reverie. As peculiar as the dollhouse was, it was nothing compared to the abrupt sound of a music box that began to play from an upper floor. Heart-pounding, I convinced myself it was merely the trick of an old, shifting house. Steeling my nerves, I ascended the grand staircase. Upon reaching the second floor, the music grew louder, guiding me toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. With a mixture of dread and intrigue, I pushed the door open. Inside, a delicate music box twirled a lone ballerina, its melody sour in the stale air. The room had a childlike aura, with faded pink wallpaper and discarded toys. It felt suspended in time, a shrine to the lost family. The music box suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, I swear I heard a faint giggle. Frozen, I searched the room with my eyes. It was then the dollhouse downstairs pricked my curiosity. Hadn't there been a family of 5 figures? But peering into the upstairs room, I counted only 4 dolls, the smallest missing. As I pondered the missing doll, the lights flickered and died. Panic began to rise in my chest, a cold sweat drenching my palms. Using my phone's flashlight, I fumbled my way back to the stairs. But when the dim light hit the bottom, it revealed a figure standing at the foot of the stairwell. A tiny silhouette, about the size of the missing doll. I blinked, and the figure disappeared. Was my mind playing games with me? Could the shadows and lightning be weaving illusions? With quickened breath, I raced downstairs. The dollhouse beckoned me, and upon inspection, I found the tiny missing figure, back in its place. It was just a child doll, I coached myself, a simple, inert toy. Just as I was ready to dismiss the entire experience, a sound broke the silence. Tiny footsteps pattering across the wooden floor above. I couldn't stop the shiver that raced down my spine as I recognized the rhythm of a child at play. Compelled by something beyond reason, I turned my gaze upstairs once more. The patter of steps converged with a creak from my right, dragging my attention to the next room. It was there I found the impossible. Another dollhouse, an exact replica too. This one was darker, aged, with dust not present in the first. Figurines matching the family were inside, though these were different, distorted, faces twisted in silent screams. My heart sank, realization dawning that each house represented a path the family could have taken. Before I could further explore this grotesque mystery, a chorus of whispers filled the air, rising from the dollhouses. They swirled around me, indistinct yet full of urgency, as if begging for release from some unspoken torment. I stumbled backward, escaping the cacophony, until I tripped over an unseen obstacle and crashed to the floor. Gazing up, I saw yet another dollhouse, one I hadn't noticed before, starkly new among the decay. And within this one, a new figure stood, a doll that looked unnervingly similar to me. As I scrambled to my feet, a cold breeze swept through the room despite the lack of wind outside. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and the house seemed to come alive with a pulse of its own. Each shadow cast by the flickering light took on a distinctive shape, moving along the walls as if dancing in a twisted celebration. The realization struck me with the force of a tidal wave. This house wanted me. It wanted me to stay, to become part of its sick collection, to trap me as it had the others. The figure of my doll flashed before my eyes, sealing my fate in this haunting mimicry if I did not escape. A primal surge of survival overcame my terror, propelling me towards the exit. Each step felt like wading through molasses, but I pushed on, my breath ragged sobs of exertion. I burst through the front door into the storm, rain washing over me like a baptism, but leaving me feeling anything but reborn. I never went back to the Whitaker house, nor did I dare to write about it, for fear of conjuring its shadows again. The rain ceased, the mansion remained, and as far as I know, so too did the dollhouses. They sit there, gathering the souls of the curious and the brave, spinning tales that few live to tell, always waiting for the next visitor to add to their grim collection. Porcelain Possession. My grandmother's house always felt like a museum of antiquities, each room a cryptic gallery of heirlooms and oddities that she claimed held sentimental value. That's probably why I never felt truly alone in that place. Even after she passed, every creak and whisper of the old Victorian home seemed laden with her presence. As executor of her estate, my job was to sift through the mountains of arcane paraphernalia. Among the collection, one item always held my attention: a delicate porcelain doll with glassy eyes that followed you from every angle. Grandma had named her Annabelle, and she was positioned like the queen she was, enthroned upon the highest shelf in the living room. "She's special, a beacon of our family's history," Grandma would say. I never understood that strange reverence, until now. It started subtly. The doll's hand position would change, or I'd notice her head was turned ever so slightly when I could have sworn it faced the other way before. The neighborhood kids spun tales of the haunted doll in the window. It was all lighthearted until the dreams began. Nightmares clawed at my sleep, each time the porcelain doll splayed center stage, her once pleasant face twisted in a sinister grimace. I'd wake with the echo of her laughter bouncing off the walls of my mind. Rationality argued it was stress, while an eerier notion suggested the doll had something to do with it. Things turned grave the night the glass case shattered. With no logical explanation, an unease settled in my bones. My nights became sleepless watches, and during the day, I felt her eyes piercing into me. Annabelle's gaze held an intelligence that was unraveling my sanity. The dream I had the night the glass broke was the most vivid. Annabelle glided toward me, her porcelain feet leaving no trace upon the carpet. She whispered of an age-old pact and my bloodline's duty. My dreamscape turned to a tableau of my ancestors, each bound by this porcelain sentinel. Fear took solid form inside me, its icy grip paralyzing. I avoided the living room, but I sensed Annabelle's presence creeping into every corner. I heard whispers, the floors seemed to breathe, and more than once I caught a blur of white darting at the periphery of my vision. I toyed with the idea of getting rid of the doll, but a paralyzing dread clutched me whenever I neared her. Then came the night that sealed my belief in the supernatural. As I lay frozen in bed, she appeared at my door, and a ghostly child's giggle wafted through the air. Annabelle spoke with a voice that held the weight of centuries. The pact must be upheld. Another must take my place to keep the guardianship alive. Trembling, I asked what she meant. "Your grandmother was the last. The lineage must continue. Without a vessel, the pact breaks and calamity will fall upon your blood." My mind reeled. Was I to become the next guardian? Another life condemned to keep watch over this porcelain warden? I struggled between breaching family legacies and the possibility of a cursed future. The decision haunted me. By now, Annabelle's presence wasn't confined to the perimeters of sleep. She was an omnipresent shadow, a cold spot in the warmth of daylight. I researched old journals and texts, uncovering my bloodline's dark past. They spoke of a deal struck for prosperity, bound by a spirit within the doll. Annabelle protected fortunes with a heavy price, one that now sought collection from me. The final entry in my grandmother's diary spoke shakily of her failing health and how Annabelle had begun seeking a new host. In hasty scrawl, she begged forgiveness from me, hoping the burden would somehow pass me by. Armed with anguished knowledge, I made my choice. Maybe the curse would end with me. I removed Annabelle from her alcove, heart pounding with every step as I approached the crackling fireplace. Annabelle's eyes, usually cold and empty, burned now with what looked like fear. Or was it fury? The flames reflected in her gaze as I edged her closer to the fire. A silent plea seemed to stretch between us, a beggar of mercy or a warning. My hands trembled. I was the heir to a legacy I never wanted. With a cry, I cast Annabelle into the fire. Her porcelain skin cracked, and an eldritch scream erupted around the room as the doll was consumed. The house groaned and shivered as if purged of a malignant fever. I stumbled out, leaving behind the cinders of heritage and horror. The night felt different, empty of laughter or whispers. A peace settled in over the following days, the air cleansed of the spectral weight. Yet in the depths of the night, when the wind howls just right, I sometimes wonder if Annabelle truly left, or if she simply found a new way to haunt me. Smiling Stranglers. The air was crisp, and twilight had cast long shadows across our suburban neighborhood when my heart first sank with unease. Old Henderson Street, usually bustling with kids playing until dinner, was eerily devoid of laughter, the emptiness underscored by the crooked swing gently creaking in the distance. The quiet was abnormal. It felt as if the town collectively held its breath. Pulling my jacket tighter around me, I set out for Jenny's house, my best friend since the 3rd grade. The entire walk over, a creeping sense of dread knotted my stomach, as if warning me to turn back. But Jenny's text, urgent, need to talk, pulsed in my mind, a modern-day SOS that couldn't be ignored. Jenny's front door was open when I got there, which set off alarms in my head louder than any physical siren could. She valued her safety. Her door remained locked even when she was home. "Jen," I called out. No answer. I slowly stepped inside, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. The living room looked normal, but as I cautiously made my way through, I noticed her family photos. Every single smiling face was somehow wrong. Their smiles were grotesque caricatures, too wide, too many teeth, and their eyes were void of warmth. Shaking, I raised my phone to call the police, but the screen blinked and died. That's when I heard humming from upstairs, a soft, twisted lullaby that sent shivers up my spine. I ascended the staircase, each step amplifying the tune and my rising panic. The humming led me to Jenny's room, where she sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, a smile plastered on her face that immediately told me this wasn't my Jenny. "Jenny, what's going on?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but fear had laced it thin. She turned her head towards me, and I saw it then, that same faux smile from the photos. Her eyes, once full of warmth and mischief, were now cold and empty. "Join us," she whispered, her voice like shattered glass. "Become happy." Before I could respond, hands grabbed me from behind. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was futile. They dragged me into the bathroom, a room of horrors. The mirror reflected a congregation of strangers, all smiling with the same gruesome expression as Jenny's, and in their midst, a figure stood out. This figure was the catalyst, the conductor of this twisted symphony. It turned to me with an otherness that paralyzed my very soul. A Cheshire grin spread across his face, and it spoke in a voice that was both far away and intimately close. "Smile, dear one. Let go of your fears and embrace happiness everlasting." I thrashed wildly, feeling my own lips start to curl upwards in response to some unseen force. No, I couldn't become like them. I wouldn't. With every ounce of willpower, I fought the smile trying to consume me, my scream a soundless plea. Suddenly, a flash of bright light pierced the room. The light blinded them, the smiling Stranglers, and loosened their grip just enough. I bolted, not daring to look back, not even as their howls filled the once silent street. I ran until my lungs burned, and I collapsed in a field far from town, beneath the indifferent stars, sobbing and smileless. Dawn broke with a softness that betrayed the horrors of the night. I wandered back to a town transformed, a masquerade of happiness. Desperate, I tried to talk to people, to warn them, but their smiles stopped listening. I was alone, the only frown in a sea of grins. Thrust into a world where smiles were a plague, I considered succumbing, just to no longer feel the isolation. But survival instinct is strong, and it whispered a relentless mantra: resist, resist, resist. Through sleepless nights and weary days, I held on to that frown, my rebellion, my hope. Months have passed, and I've learned to blend in, to mimic their grins while my heart remains heavy with loss. I glimpse others from time to time, their eyes filled with the same fear, the same resistance. We're a silent network, the unseen fighters in this smiling apocalypse. We found ways to communicate, coded messages within forced pleasantries. Plans have begun to take shape, whispers of an uprising. As long as we can still frown, we can still fight. And maybe, just maybe, we can reclaim our town, our freedom from the smiling Stranglers. The Marionette's Curse. Ever since I could remember, the rickety old house at the edge of our town was whispered about among my school friends. They said it was haunted, damned by the tragedy of its former owner, a reclusive puppeteer known for his strange and lifelike marionettes. It was on a hazy October evening that my curiosity outgrew my fear, and I found myself pushing open the creaky gate leading to the abandoned lot. As I stepped inside, the musty air of the long-forgotten greeted me. The house groaned under its own weight, and the murmurs of the past clung to the peeling wallpaper. Working up the nerve, I edged further in, my flashlight's beam slicing through the thick darkness. That was when I saw it, a wooden marionette dangling from a rusted hook on the wall, as if on display for me. Its carved face was stern with faded paint hugging its features. Yet somehow it felt as if it was watching me, sizing me up. A childish impulse urged me to reach out, to touch it, to see if it was as real as it appeared. The second my fingers brushed against its cold wood, a chill ran up my spine. The marionette's eyes, once dead and empty, now seemed to burn with silent life. Shaken, I stumbled back, and that's when I heard the soft, sinister clinking of other marionettes stirring in the darkness. Panicked, I shone the light around the room only to find marionettes everywhere, each with their own unique, ghastly expression. My stomach churned with the realization that I wasn't alone, and a puppet show of a lifetime was about to begin, with or without my consent. I turned to run, but the door I came through had vanished, replaced by smooth, unyielding wall. Heart pounding, I circled the room, feverishly searching for an exit, but the walls seemed to close in, the whispers of the marionettes echoing in my ears, taunting. That's when the chanting started. Low and monotonous, it filled the room, sending the hanging marionettes into jerking, unsettling movements. It was the puppeteer's voice, I was sure of it, resonating from the shadows, cursing me with every syllable. I had to find a way out before I became one of his twisted creations. The floorboards quivered with the rhythm of the chant, and a narrow passageway cracked open in the wall. No longer belonging to myself, I was drawn towards it, deeper into the belly of the accursed house. What awaited me was a workshop littered with tools and wood shavings, and at its heart, a circle of marionettes locked in a dance of the dead. I watched in horror as their wooden limbs moved with eerie grace. In the center of the circle was an unfinished marionette, its eyes hollow, its strings slack. It was a mirror image of me, and at the realization, I felt a tightness around my limbs, an invisible force manipulating my movements. Struggling against the unseen strings, I battled the curse trying to claim me. It was a fight for my soul, a tug of war between the marionette that wore my face and the flesh and blood desperation that clawed within my chest. In one final, desperate push, I screamed out against the darkness, my voice breaking the chant and shattering the symphony of horror. The strings binding me snapped, and the marionettes collapsed in lifeless heaps. Daylight pierced the gloom as the walls of the cursed house crumbled to dust around me. Lying amidst the ruins, my breath came in ragged gasps. I had broken the marionette's curse, or so I hoped. As I pushed myself to stand, I couldn't shake off the feeling that somewhere in the shadowed corners of the world, those dead puppet eyes still watched me, waiting for the next unwitting soul to wander into their master's lair. Unseen Playmates. We had just moved into an old colonial house on the outskirts of town, the kind that whispers stories through its creaking floorboards and drafty hallways. It was supposed to be our fresh start, away from the buzz of city life, surrounded by the serenity of nature. Our daughter Ellie was usually shy, but she seemed to adapt quickly, claiming she had made friends with the kids in the walls. We assumed it was her active imagination helping her cope with the move. Every night, she'd babble excitedly about her new playmates, giving them names like Mr. Whispers and Shadow Sue. At first, it was adorable. Kids come up with all sorts of invisible friends. But then Ellie started saying unsettling things. "They don't like it when you go into the attic," she'd whisper, her small hand clutching mine with surprising strength. "They want to play there alone." Despite her warnings, curiosity got the better of me, and I went to inspect the attic. Cobwebs clung to my face as I rummaged through dusty boxes of forgotten memories, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until I shifted a large trunk, and a chill scurried down my spine. Scratched into the wooden floor beneath where the trunk had been were names, dozens of them, surrounded by strange symbols. The same names Ellie had been chanting for weeks. My heart pounded heavy in my chest, and I hurried back downstairs, unease tightening around my throat. Ellie's behavior grew stranger. She'd stare blankly at walls, giggling at unheard jokes. But it wasn't just inside the house she was acting differently. In the garden, she'd abruptly stop playing and look off into the woods, whispering, "Not now, later." One evening, during dinner, Ellie fell silent, seemingly listening to a distant conversation. Suddenly, she turned to me, her eyes hollow. "Mr. Whispers says it's time for you to leave," she stated, her voice steady, unnatural. Panic fluttered in my chest, and I dropped my fork with a clatter. Heavy footsteps trod overhead, thumping a path from the attic towards Ellie's room. But we were alone in the house, or so I had believed. My wife paled, gripping my hand under the table as I tried to rationalize the sounds. That night, the air turned frigid, breaths hanging like specters above our beds. The moon illuminated Ellie's empty room, her covers thrown back, window wide open. We rushed outside, our calls for Ellie seeping into the inky blackness of the surrounding woods. The trees stood guard, silent and motionless, their shadows weaving a tapestry of dread. I stumbled upon the remnants of a crude circle of stones, the earth inside it darker, as if it bore the stain of an ancient fire. In its center, so tiny and out of place, was Ellie's favorite stuffed animal, its button eyes staring accusingly at me. A wisp of a giggle floated through the air, pulling us deeper into the woods. Our flashlights darted from gnarled tree to gnarled tree, the light catching glimpses of movement that couldn't be real. "Ellie!" I screamed until my voice was raw. We searched for hours, the night unyielding, the echoes of our desperation beaten back by the silence. Just as we thought all hope was lost, a sob cracked through the stillness. Ellie. Frantically following the sound, we found her standing by the edge of a stagnant pond, trembling. She was whispering to the void when we reached her, soaked and shivering. Her eyes, once brimming with innocence, were hollow, as though she had seen things no child should. We wrapped her in our arms and carried her back home, fleeing the darkness that seemed to snap hungrily at our heels. Daylight didn't dispel the fear that night had engraved in our souls. Ellie wouldn't speak of what had happened, and her playmates' names were never mentioned again. But their presence, whatever unnatural thing they had been, lingered. Eventually, we left the colonial house behind, the ache of what had transpired too heavy to bear. But sometimes, in the quietest hours of night, I'd wake to the faint sound of children's whispers, a hair-raising reminder of the unseen playmates, eager for another round of their sinister games.